right, welcome back to the SoundWorks Collection. I'm Michael Coleman, and I'm so excited to talk with the creative team behind Zenimation. If you're not familiar with Zenimation, it's a show on Disney+. It's two of my favorite things, sound and Disney. I'm so excited to have executive producer Amy Astley with us today. Amy, welcome.
It's great to be here, Michael. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, David Bess, our editor and creator of Zenimation.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
Sound designer Shannon Mills.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And re-recording mixer David Fluhr. Great to have you all here.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael.
So maybe I'll start with David. Give some context. How are you involved with Disney? What's your history with Disney? And when did the light bulb go on for you to create this show?
Sure. And creator is a very generous term because I'm basically taking the work of countless artists and technicians from the beginning of Walt Disney Animation Studios with the first feature Snow White up until our most recent one, Raya and the Last Dragon. So, but as an editor for our marketing department here inside the actual studio, I mostly cut internal promotional sizzle pieces, things to kind of get the company excited about the movies that are coming up. And I'm always kind of like excited and looking for excuses to showcase the legacy of our films. So this one in particular was a real treat because, you get to go through and pull clips from all of these spectacular films.
What was the aha moment for you? What inspired you to do this?
Well, it was a couple of things. There was a need to come up with some sort of new material for Walt Disney Animation Studios booth at the exhibit floor of the D23 Expo a few years ago. And at that booth, it's on the exhibit floor. So there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of people around, a lot going on. And, it just occurred to me, like, I wonder if there's something that we could do that would be a little more calm and peaceful, something that kind of is almost counter-programming to what you would see there. And around that time, I was kind of also just fascinated with ASMR videos and just kind of the whole idea of sound, that sound could cause a reaction in you that could be relaxing, things that you wouldn't think would be relaxing, like someone combing their hair. I've also just always been a big fan and had a kind of a particular fondness for long takes in our films, establishing shots, scenic shots, those shots that really showcase just the incredible worlds that these artists create. And then one more little tiny thing is just kind of noticing that when you turn off the dialogue and music on these films, you suddenly are much more aware of the soundscape and then rich sound design that goes into them. So it's kind of a combination of all those things.
So, David, when you took this idea, did you go to Amy next, or how does one pitch a crazy, and I say crazy in the most endearing way, a crazy idea like this?
When we initially did it for D23 Expo, we just kind of did it, and then I'll probably let Amy answer this because she, after we used it at D23, then she kind of took it from there.
Well, I think you're already seeing from David his love of the history of Disney animation and our respect for the legacy. I feel the very same way. This was the place I dreamt of working when I was a little kid, and I'm lucky enough to head up our publicity department and head up our unscripted efforts and our animation research libraries, our archives. I just feel like the luckiest person to get to work in all of this, and I feel like David shares that love so much. So he was just showing me this, and it's a snippet he created for this booth television monitor, right? And it was a scene from Frozen 1 with Kristoff and Anna walking through the forest, and all the trees are covered in ice, and they make this beautiful sound. And I had watched that film a million times, and I had really never noticed that sound as prominently as it sounded when he had taken out the music and the dialogue, and you're only hearing these beautiful sound effects. And it was a scene, and he was already calling it Zenimation, but it was a scene. And I had met with a wonderful guy, Jordan Gilbert, over at Disney Plus, who was saying they were looking for things that were unusual. They were looking for things that might be helpful to families when they watch Disney Plus, to be entertaining, but also perhaps be something that could be used for mindfulness. And I immediately grabbed Jordan and said, "You're coming down the hall with me to meet David Bess." And David put on this Frozen 1 Zenimation clip, and David Bess and I, over the next few weeks, figured out, could this be a series? And in fact, we realized there was an abundance of these very special moments in our films that you could put together in very clever montages. And if you watch them, especially an episode like Flight from season 1, the way David puts these scenes together is an art form unto itself. He's very humble. He won't say that himself. So I'm glad I'm here to say it. And really create a series out of this.
So David and Shannon, when Amy and David reached out to you to propose this idea, where do your minds go? Because both of you have had extensive experience in history working on Disney projects, Marvel, Pixar, I mean, the whole gamut of the Disney family. Yeah, what did you guys think? David, what was your first impressions?
Well, thinking about those times also that we were in at the beginning of the pandemic, it just seemed like the perfect complement to offering people some quality time and quality space where, because there was a lot of stress with what was going on with the lockdowns and people, not knowing what was going to happen. And we're just coming out of it now. But back then it was very stressful, and people, the idea that we could create this thing for people, which is really what the Disney brand is, what we're all about, is that storytelling, which is really unique. The opportunity to do that, first of all, was, yes, jump on whatever we can do. The other part of it is to showcase the sonic soundscapes of our movies when, we all in the sound world are very conscious of the awareness of, sound in the movies, and people always know when it's not there or it's bad. But here we have the opportunity to really put the spotlight on, and if you look at the credits of what's at the end of each of the episodes or the long play that's strung together, you're seeing names of people that are just iconic sound designers and creators of emotional, beautiful moments in our films that many times, as it is on the dub stage when we have dialogue and music and effects and we're constantly sharing the storytelling, this seemed like an opportunity not to pass up, especially when I was working with Shannon, who was really a master at it.
Oh, thank you.
Shannon, I can imagine, when we're on the dub stage, maybe it's a running joke when we just lower the music track and we just have our effects channel. In this case, it's like these are kind of like, that's part of this series. So yeah, what were your thoughts when you found out about this?
That was my immediate reaction, was like, wait, no music, no dialogue? What? So yeah, it was a great way to be able to feature so much great work that had been done that sometimes doesn't get the spotlight, or, as David was saying, is sometimes done so well that people just don't think about it because, it sounds right to them. So it seemed like a really fun opportunity to feature a lot of great sound designers and their past work. It was just a lot of, interesting stuff to hear in isolation.
So, David Bess, when you first maybe got the green light and they said, all right, you have carte blanche of maybe the Disney library, where does one even start to come up with themes? How did you guys start to structure? Because in the first season, there's 10 episodes and, there's like water, cityscapes, discovery, flight. Like there's some broad subjects that that you're going to find enough material to build, a 6-7 minute piece. But how far down the rabbit hole did you end up going?
Well, I think, it's kind of like you said, there were some themes and topics that just seemed pretty clear, like flight. And I think even like from this latest season, transformation, I feel like the legacy of Disney animated films, you're going to find those in, all over, right? All over the canon. I think it was also, Amy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I felt like it was a little bit of a balancing act sometimes between, let's try to have themes that are purely just, exactly like, right off the bat, you can tell what they are, whether it's rain or water. And then we thought, well, are there other ones that are a little more esoteric, whether it's kindness, everyday comforts, those being from this most latest season. But it really was just more letting the clips and kind of guide what the themes were going to be. It wasn't so much like, oh, let's come up with this theme and then try to find clips to fit it. It was more like, okay, we have hundreds of clips here. How can we separate them into categories that make sense? But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Amy? I'm not.
No, I think you just named a couple of my favorites that, yes, of course, we have episodes that focus on rain, on snowscapes, these wonderful sort of sounds that come from our incredible sound artists for those, sort of more on the nose themes. But then these wonderful constructs that David Bess would put together, like kindness. That's such a David Bess thing to think of kindness as a theme. And it's there, it's in our movies. And to see it all put together, I think is very special.
I mean, Baymax is, when you think of kindness, I think of Baymax. So, I mean, it seems appropriate. So maybe you can walk through and give me an understanding of the process. So David, would you start with your edit track? And then once you had, what was the review of the process? How did you handle it? How did you collaborate with Shannon and David and the rest of the sound team?
Shannon made it really easy. I think Shannon had the really hard part.
He does.
Yeah. I mean, I had access to a variety of sources. Our most recent films, it was pretty consistent. We had separate dialogue, effects, music stems, so easy to send that. And but to be fair, a lot of times it was only stereo stems that I was handing over to Shannon, and sometimes it was a mono effect stem. Sometimes it was just. I mean, Shannon, I'll let you go into detail on that, but it really came down to. I had the easy part. Hats off to you, Shannon, for dealing with the mess of elements I gave to you.
No, it was great. It was very organized, but David's right. There was a lot of variation, as you might imagine, given the age of some of these pieces and the different practices that have changed over time. All the recent films were pretty easy and all separated out in any format you want. But you go back a ways and, you may only have one format or two formats. And not to mention, at the time we did the first season, it was difficult to access things because everything was closed. So we were, having to go through all these channels to try and dig up, old pieces of audio when nobody was at Disney. Or very few people were at Disney. But yeah, we started with what David had and tried to get the best version of everything we could get for the particular clip that he chose. Started building there. I can let David talk about, intermixing all those different formats and things.
We would have reviews also on just reviewing either Clearview or Evercast, whatever we needed to do to be able to get everybody in the same room and review the progress of the sound work after David finished his cuts. And so Shannon and I got to collaborate, and David and all of us actually, but Shannon and I had a lot of offline conversations about how are we going to build this and make it work? Because the first season I mixed here in my home theater with basically stone knives and bear skins, and, but 5.1 in stereo for the channel and for Disney Plus. So we came up with a template that would include, up to 25 different versions of stems from 7.1 down to mono. and then, a whole template of laying out sound effects in organized fashion. We can get into that if we want, but, sound effects, backgrounds, and stems. And it's the combination of all these things transitioning in and out that we would have many conversations about how to keep it smooth and Zen-like, because some of these things like flying and, some of these things can get very aggressive, visually as well as sonically. So we had to kind of work a lot to make sure we stayed, in that mindful Zen mode. We had access to a lot of stems and materials. And the other thing that we've sort of touched on is the full gamut of our movies, with 58 of them now, or 59, I can't remember. 59 now. Some of them go way back to optical tracks, which we had access to, but maybe only they didn't have split stems like we do now. Not even, keeping music and effects together sometimes. And so on some of the earlier films, we tried to stay true to the director's vision always of what we were doing and keep it very mono, very in the center, but mindful of how we're going back and forth between these materials, so it didn't suddenly just jump to another, wider format. But we were very careful to maintain the original intent of the early films and not just spread them around. In the second season, we were able to go on the lot and mix in home atmos, and so that allowed a much more enveloping experience, but still did the same concepts. So it was a lot of planning, a lot of talking, a lot of reviewing, and and everybody just chipping in to make it what it is.
I'd love to understand maybe how authentic you are to, some of these moments, because, I think when you go into the tracks, you might see it works for a full soundtrack with music and everything else. But when you strip things away, it might feel a little bare. So how did you guys spot these and determine we need to accentuate some moments? Like, what were the rules you guys came up with?
Amy can speak a little bit to this, but one of the things was just taste and feel. And so, a lot of the modern films were not a problem because we're used to filling things, out so much now, and we have so much more capacity to do that with digital and things like that. But the older films sometimes, they would be very music driven. And in that case, sometimes they wouldn't cover everything, that was on screen, or only a few things. And so we would sometimes embellish those moments to help them fit a little bit better. But as David said, we tried to just, be tasteful about it and stick with the film and not modernize the film. And so a little bit of that was guided by Amy, who's very good at knowing old Disney films. And so it was just kind of a case-by-case basis.
One of the other tools that we were made sure that Shannon had was access to the Jimmy Mcdonald library, which, is the source for so much of the original stuff.
The Jimmy Mcdonald library, having that available, and that would kind of be my first, like when I was trying to restructure something that was missing or not there, that would be my first stop, is like, what all can I get from this library to help me, fill this scene.
And for those who don't know, Jimmy Mcdonald is the man when it comes to sound design in our early days. there's a terrific example of when the dwarves are sneaking up the stairs in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and you hear their shoes squeaking. That was Jimmy McDonald's wallet that he was bending back and forth. This guy was incredible. And he actually took over the voice of Mickey Mouse from the original voice of Mickey Mouse, who was, of course, Walt Disney. So to be able to have that resource, because I think we were all gut checking each other on making sure, particularly when we are working with David Fluhr and Shannon Mills, who have contributed to the sound design and sound mixing of some of our best films, we want to respect the work of those who came before us. And so always sort of gut checking with each other. Are we doing something that, had they done sound design to that shot originally, would be perhaps how it would sound, perhaps how they too would design it. And I think Shannon did a magnificent job of that. Season 1, we didn't really go any earlier than Sleeping Beauty. We were working more in the space of what we had stems for. And we went all the way back to Snow White on season 2, again, knowing we were in the hands of Shannon and David Fluhr to do this work. But, you know, when you're creating a sound design for a moment as iconic as Cinderella's dress transformation, that did not have sound to it. It had music to it. You know, Shannon, I don't know what that was like for you, if you want to speak to that, but I think you did it beautifully. And that's a pretty tall task, I think.
Yeah. And again, as David was saying, it's all about, I was trying to stay true to that time period, listening to older films, how they sound, trying to use, like it's kind of a magical sequence. So kind of reviewing how old magic sort of sounded, back in the day and things like that. It was a lot of homework, really.
Well, and A-Being and listening.
A-Being, yep.
And that would be a great guide to be able to just listen. Okay, here's the way they did it. And, we have to stay in that vein.
I would say it's pretty remarkable to look back. I know David Fluhr knows this. But we spoken before about Fantasound and Disney's history with having, not only their hand in the visuals and animation, but in sound and pushing it from mono to stereo, which at the time was like a big deal. And so
they were doing in the early 40s, Fantasound was surround.
Right.
And, incredible. I mean, all optical tracks and a live performance in a mixer, with the mixer in a theater. The idea of it was, I think, because live audio films were shown with orchestras playing along, not necessarily soundtrack, but a live orchestra. And so the vibe was to recreate for an audience how that would feel, so they would be feeling something that they're used to hearing and feeling. And so they created these surround tracks. Pretty amazing technology for back then.
Yeah, it looked like even going back to The Sorcerer's Apprentice, that's 38, 39, which to imagine like how groundbreaking that was. It just seems that you guys are a continuation of this history of Disney having their hand in
innovation. Really that's what's also attracted me to the studio when I joined in 2004. There's a lot going on under the hood here, that inventions that were being done by engineers who were also storytellers and, craftspeople who were helping the animators tell stories. It's a whole nother conversation, but it's very attractive to those of us, especially in sound. We've witnessed the innovation and the ability to tell stories in new ways to where we are now. It's been exponential, right? And and even in our Zenimation world, we've gone from very small to, home atmos. So it's kind of very cool.
Yeah. Were there any surprises even for David Bess when like covering turning over some of these rocks and realizing that maybe something that you thought was going to work didn't work, or like what were some of the unexpected kind of unforeseen aspects of putting these stories together when it comes to creating themes and creating like an interesting sonic like tapestry for these episodes?
Well, I think Amy mentioned one of the best examples. It was the same for me, that scene from Frozen when the main characters are walking through the snow, and I felt the same way. I'd seen that scene countless times, and for the first time, I was like, oh, I can hear their footsteps in the snow, and that's a wonderful crunchy sound that they're making. It really was just like a different experience. I think there were a handful of scenes like that. A few stand out. One in particular, Little Mermaid, the opening sequence of Little Mermaid, the opening title sequence. The score is very prominent in that, which makes sense, and you understand why they did that. And it works, of course. But just removing it, suddenly, oh my goodness, I'm hearing bubbles and I'm hearing, the sound of fish moving through the water. Things like that. I think one of my other favorite examples is actually from one of the movies that Shannon did sound design for, Big Hero 6. And it's also a scene that I think for me was just like the perfect, example of what we could do with animation. And it's when Baymax and Hiro, after having that great, glorious, victorious flight through San Fransokyo, and they stop for a rest on top of one of those big, it looks like a blimp, but I think it's like a big air processor up in the sky. And they just sit there and watch the sunset. And, I think there's a little bit of underscore in that scene in the film, but, even just removing that underscore and just being able to focus on the sound effects to the point where you just hear, Baymax's feet going like that when he's imitating Hiro doing that, and the fact that they're just there soaking in the environment. And like Amy said, a mindfulness moment, they're just taking in their environment. Those kind of, maybe one more example that really stood out was, especially because it's such an iconic Disney animated scene, is the opening to The Lion King, Circle of Life. I mean, my goodness, when you think of Lion King, that song, at least for me, it just pops into my head. Right. But when you, again, and it's a masterful scene. I mean, it just, with that music, incredible. But just to experience it differently when you remove that, for me, again, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm hearing the sound of all these different creatures, birds' wings flapping, and it's all there, of course, but just to let it have kind of take center stage. Yeah.
So many times when we're working on the films, we don't really know what music is going to stay in and what music's going to go away. I mean, main title, you can be pretty sure. But, there are moments where we're going to take the music out suddenly, and all of a sudden there's got to be coverage. And so sound designers, I mean, Shannon can speak to this, but anything that moves gets a sound, has to be created by a fabulous Foley artist like John Rush, who's in a lot of our movies, or, sound editors and designers that create the full soundscape, imagining that there's no music there. And then when we do have music, it's a matter of what we take away, what needs to take away, what needs to trade off, and that's mixing. Those are the choices we constantly make. But in the newer films especially, we had access to those things to be able to flesh them back out again and see the original vision of the sound designer.
And Michael, I think you were kind of asking, was there anything we wanted to do and couldn't?
Yeah, sure.
I'll just say we have sort of one slightly wild episode of season 1 called Levity, where we were like, let's do a funny episode. Let's see if that works in this ASMR. And I love that because it gets to highlight two of my favorite scenes in our recent films. And one is from Big Hero 6, from Shannon David's work on Big Hero 6, with the air escaping Baymax's arm, and talk about highlighting sound design outside of Zenimation. Just watch Big Hero 6 and pay attention to how much sound is part of what makes Baymax's character. From the moment he and Hiro meet each other in Hiro's bedroom for the first time, and the squeaking sound he makes as he slowly edges his way to meet Hiro, to that moment in the police station, and then low battery Baymax falling on the staircase too. Sound is such an important part of that. And also in that Levity episode, the classic sloth scene from Zootopia. To just listen to that as you watch that scene just kills no matter what. It's just brilliant.
This is the one at the DMV, is that right?
Yeah.
Exactly right. The sloth scene in the DMV, to do that in a Levity episode was really fun. So David Bess and I did try for a while during the making of season 2 to do a villains episode. And it turns out a lot of times these very dark characters will make very pleasant sounds. we were like, I think we have something here. But just in the spirit of the audience that we're hearing from on social media and what they get from this show, we thought, I don't think we can give them villains. I think they're tuning into this for a myriad of reasons to appreciate our sound and visual artists, but also for mindfulness. I don't think we can throw bad guys at them. So maybe season 3, maybe we'll do it then.
So, okay. So that's my question. Okay. So David has this idea, you get greenlit for season 1, and then you share with the community, with the fans, and they say, this is fantastic. And all of a sudden, almost like less than a year later, you're working on season 2. So what did you learn from season 1 that maybe you applied to season 2 or you wanted to do differently? Like what was the takeaway from season 1?
Well, 2 things. This team put together by audience demand for season 1, kind of a full journey episode where you press play once and you see all the episodes put together. So from the get-go of season 2, we knew we wanted to have the individual episodes as well as that one long form episode, because that's what people were asking for, because they were enjoying how unplugged and how tuned into these visuals and sounds they could be. So that was definitely something from the get-go. Anything else, you guys, that you have?
Surprises. There were a few cases, or maybe only one, where we didn't have an effects-only track. So I had an effects music track, and it was a lot of R&D of trying to rebuild, this short section of a film from like the Jimmy Mcdonald library and anything I could find where they might have gotten sound and other archives and things, and even parts later in the movie where I could steal isolated, sounds and try to rebuild this short little piece of a scene. That was probably the biggest surprise I had when going through that.
Shannon handed me just a beautiful palette to work from, and by the time it got to me, transitions to me were the hardest things, because we didn't want them to be jarring. We didn't want them to be a sudden change of gear, like all of a sudden it's something else. It had, so these big, long, so using, various techniques, and sometimes some were more successful than others with, going in and out. And we also had a ding at the front and end of each episode that is a bell being hit. And so we had to be very mindful of not hitting people over the head with that, so to speak, and being gentle, but yet, it was a big long reverb tail on it and it would extend forever. And then we had to take those out when we put the long play together. So the transitions are the thing that really are a thing of beauty to me in terms of how they all go together. And amazingly enough, they all kind of flow together like one.
Who's okay? That's a great point. Who's the meditator in the group? Who knows that that's the end of our meditation session and we're now wrapping up? Who knew that?
I knew that, but I think it was probably David's idea, David Bess. I'm not sure.
I'm definitely not an expert on meditation nor on mindfulness, but I was just aware that was something that you do before you meditate. And from what I've been told, again, I'm no expert, but I think the idea is to sort of literally clear the air, sort of like, okay, take a deep breath, that kind of thing,
Watching this at home where, because it is on Disney Plus, majority of people, we're never going to have a chance to see it in a theater. I would love to see this in a theater, a proper theater setting with a huge screen. But most people are going to watch this in their homes where I feel like there's a lot of distractions. And the thing I experienced myself even last week, like I was sharing before, is like sharing it with your family, like you get drawn into it in a way that you listen more intentfully than I think you otherwise would do, because it is so, the dynamics in what you're building in your soundtrack are so unique. So I'd love to understand, even David Fluhr and David Bess, how do you building dynamic, like quiet isn't always something that people want to do. So how did you guys build the dynamics in the track?
First of all, for me, just, being aware that a lot of people are going to be listening on headphones. And my understanding is that people did listen on earbuds in bed or before bed, even just to the track. And so I mixed 5.1, but also stereo, using headphones. And I'm not used to doing that theatrically at all, right? And so there was some challenges there for me, getting it all to work in here.
Yeah. David Bess, I feel like something that kind of stitches scenes to scenes is maybe some atmospheres or winds or moments that kind of bridge some of those gaps. Like how did you make it so it wasn't like it didn't feel like a hard cut? How did you orchestrate some of the transitions? What was the combination?
Well, again, that's all Shannon and Mr. Fluhr, because again, that was the thing too. I felt really lucky knowing that these guys were going to take it over, because it kind of gave me the freedom to focus more on the juxtaposition between pictures, and sometimes knowing that, we're going from Raya and the Last Dragon to Bambi for example, in the Rain episode. It was really nice knowing that, okay, I can just focus on finding those visual links and try to make those as smooth as possible, knowing that these guys were going to deal with the audio. I mean, I think in the first season, I tried to be a little more mindful of that and not having really jarring, juxtapositions as far as sound goes. But I have to admit, knowing that David and Shannon were going to be taking it after me, I really felt like, I can just let them figure it out. And I got one of my favorite examples of that is in the Rain episode, where you go from Raya and the Last Dragon to a shot of Bambi. It's raining in both scenes. I mean, what's the span of years between those pictures and the audio dynamics? And these guys made it sound like there's a difference, but you still feel like you're in the same world, and it feels that way throughout the whole episode. You're going through all these different eras of filmmaking, and as David pointed out earlier, it's cool to hear the subtleties of the dynamics of sound and how they tried to be true to the period of when that film was made. But at the same time, you still feel like you're in this sort of complete, sort of cohesive world of sound at the same time. So it's really those guys.
That's one trick we did do. We used ambiances throughout each piece to kind of be more of a glue for transitions and for the piece itself. Like with Rain, we tried to make real long transitions, and we would sometimes add rain, specifically either for a surround effect or for a transition effect to help bring us in and out of these pieces that are, from very different time periods, which David also helped with, in the mixing process.
Well, I had several reverbs going, which help with long tails sometimes, to be able to grab onto something and gently transition so that you're not aware of it. But those are all tools we normally use for those kinds of things. One of the hardest things to do, Disney Plus has a delivery spec that you got to hit that's usually based on dialogue. We didn't have any. And so that was a challenge. I don't want to make it about the technical stuff, but that was just another thing we had to deal with in order to deliver it so that it would play correctly at home.
Well, first of all, Michael, I'm sure you can tell that this team is just so hard to work with, because it's all me, everybody. I mean, talk about such a wonderful group of people to get to work together on something like this. And I will say, we were thinking of the audience during season 1. You were talking about the audience. Season 2, we really had them in mind, of course, because we had heard from them. And there were a couple of things that happened on season 1 that stuck in our minds making season 2 that I think were really profound. One was the sound community. It was so cool to see and hear from the sound community their response to this. That I think that meant the world to us. And then secondly, and something that we couldn't have predicted that was so wonderful, was the Walt Disney Company has a really active children's hospital program. And Zenimation is now on the app for those kids who are in hospitals and their families. And that's an audience that I think just gives us all goosebumps that we're able to provide this to, and hopefully it provides some sense of comfort or relaxation in their days. So I think we had all of those people in mind when we were making season 2.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that point up because, I think when David Bess had the initial idea of this seems really cool, maybe there's more to it. Let's see how long that tail is and how far we can stretch this. And I can just imagine that as we kind of, expose people to other aspects of the Disney, this universe of, sound and just every, the sound, just like all the layers that are being put into these films, that there's more stories to tell, and not all the stories have to be so dialogue or music, which is like a weird thing to say, but like this just proves, which is I can't really think of, like, the only thing that came to mind was like Wally, like was like the only character of like nonverbal, like he doesn't talk, he just like makes noises, which Ben Burt was a masterful class on that. So it doesn't happen very often, I guess.
Yeah, let's talk about animation. I think one of the reasons so many of us fell in love with animation is nothing is given to you, especially sound. Everything is created by the hands of the artists. And so to me, it is mind-blowing that this most collaborative of art forms, we have over 900 people right now, including David Fluhr and Shannon Mills, working on Encanto. And that 900 people's different visions and different artistic aesthetics come together to create this one piece of art is incredible. And that there is no sound that you accidentally picked up on a mic that comes to you. It is completely designed by these artists. I think it's something that hopefully Zenimation puts a magnifying lens on.
It's sort of a requirement because these films take 3 to 5 years to make generally. When talking about the feature films, you got to have the people involved really have a different mindset in terms of being able to get along with each other. And certain films were on and off in 6 months and we tolerate, but this is really requires people to be collaborative. And when you step back and you realize that, I was looking over the fence, what I used to say, looking over the fence at Disney Animation for many years in awe of the culture and, the beauty of, the diversity and just the storytelling. And then to be finally invited in just kind of makes me extremely grateful to be a part of this team. And we can walk down the hallway and sit with David Bess and talk about how can we make, how can sound help this story, and how can a picture cut maybe make an adjustment? You got a great sound moment. I mean, these are things that don't happen that often, so it's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Are there any things, I was wondering, like when you mentioned Frozen, are there things that were maybe considered music that are now treated as sound? Like I was thinking in Frozen of like, I can't pronounce her name. Ina Mazel.
Oh, Idina Menzel.
Idina Menzel. Let me try this again.
We like to call her Tony Award winning.
Tony Award winning. All right, let me take it back. So,
now, what did John Travolta call her?
He called her Adele Dazeem.
Oh, jeez. All right. Well, I guess let me rephrase. Let me reset this up. Was there anything in the project that was considered music, or maybe that wasn't considered, a sound that is treated as a sound, or interpreted visually, that was visually represented, and now like you're representing with sound?
There were so many things in that film that Odin Benitez, the supervising sound editor, created, like for the Northern Lights, and some of those environments that just were tonal. I'm not sure we have any of it featured in any of the specific scenes we took, but I mean, there was a lot of that in Frozen. I mean, look, there's a blurred line in almost all the crafts now between music and sound design and music. Some people are using similar tools and things, but let me think about this to see if there was anything that we actually have in Zen.
Idina Menzel does do a guest star role in Zenimation season 1. Let's not forget. You do hear Idina, Tony Award winning Idina Menzel. During Frozen 2, Bruni, the little salamander, jumps into her hands, and it's hot. So you hear Idina go, "Ow, ow." So there's some guest starring roles in Zenimation.
I remember back on that film, we created this sort of chant like "oh" kind of thing for this like ceremony that happened with spinning stones and things, and that I think could be mistaken for music.
So David Bess, well, one of the questions that does not even relate to sound is the visual aspect ratio. We're talking about going from old school 4:3 when TVs were square tubes to, the 16:9 aspect ratio and beyond. How did you determine, because it jumps frame shot to shot, we're seeing the aspect ratio shift around. What's your take on it?
Yeah. Well, you bring up a really, a valid point. And I think that there are times, to be honest, where it's a little jarring. I don't think most viewers are used to seeing that, right? So if you have a scope film that's, you're watching on a monitor or your TV, I think, if you're, I should rephrase it, if you're having a montage or something like Zenimation where you're going from varying aspect ratios from a square to a really wide aspect ratio like CinemaScope or 2.35, yeah, I think the tendency, most people will be like, well, why don't you blow up the image or crop the image, resize it so that everything is consistent and it fills the screen? Because I think there's this thing where, I have, this is my favorite subject. I love to get into discussions with people about this because people are like, well, I don't want to see those black bars. I don't want to see I want the screen to be filled with an image. Well, I think if you look at a monitor as not so much as something that has to be filled, but like a canvas almost maybe. So that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To be specifically, yeah, we decided to just kind of, to keep everything framed within a CinemaScope frame because that is the widest, biggest aspect ratio, right? And most of our recent films are designed for that. And it just kind of made sense to then frame everything else within that. So if you've got a shot of Bambi, yeah, it's going to be like a square image there. And then if you follow it with a shot from Frozen, it's suddenly going to go like that. That being said, we tried to every now and then do some little trick transitions to kind of smooth that out. But it's tricky. I think the main thing really is we wanted to be respectful of the original image. We didn't want to have to crop off something that, again, to Amy's point about these films and the artistry that goes into them, all the thought, like nothing is by accident. Every single thing you see in that frame, someone had to think about it and put it there. And it wasn't just they thought it and did it. Like there was a lot of debating, you can be guaranteed that what you're seeing on the screen took a lot of thought and a lot of effort. So I just thought, I just cannot feel good about cropping off some of that image. Like just show it all. So I would rather have a little bit of jarring every now and then.
It's the same concept, David, that we were talking about with sound, because in season 2, we're full home Atmos. And we decided to not, it's the same concept, just with different frequencies. With sound, we're not going crazy with this in the older stuff where the aspect ratio might be different. We're also making the sound match, but it's like you say, the transitions in and out. If we had put a large plosive sound effect on each one of those aspect changes, it would feel completely different because we'd be pointing that out or making something out of it. But I think the combination of sound and picture and the transitions all work to make it work.
That's awesome. I'd love just maybe close out with maybe one of the unexpected or favorite. You mentioned Baymax with, the air coming out of him. Well, what were some of the other, like when you're digging through the tracks and you're just like, you can't believe that that's the sound that was associated with one of the characters, one of the moments. Maybe David Bess, what's your favorite moment?
Well, the one that comes to mind, and it was something that I had not noticed, but it's there actually in the original sound design, and you can tell that it was designed and mixed to have the power that it does. And it's the one that pops into mind is from Tarzan, when Jane and Tarzan are meeting each other for the first time. There's really no dialogue. All you hear, they're up in a tree, right? All you really hear is the sound of rain around them, and it's gentle rain, right? It's not like a lot of thunder and lightning. It's just gentle rain, and they put their hands together, and Tarzan realizes as he puts his hand against Jane's that he's human. They're the same in that way, and it's at that moment that you hear a thunderclap, a little bit of lightning in the background, right at that moment. And to me, that is just like, gosh, talk about great great sound design. And nothing to take away from what Shannon and David did as far as embellishing or bringing out. But I think to me, that's an example too of just great sound design in our movies that is already there too.
Yeah. What about you, Amy?
The opportunity to connect in a different way with the films that maybe formed your love of Disney animation to begin with. In my case, that's the late 80s, early 90s. So some of the sound design from Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, these 4 films that we watched over and over and over again on VHS and then DVD, and to hear some of those sound designs really for the first time was such a wonderful experience. And I would encourage everyone to consider Zenimation almost an entryway. Watch the show, and then on Disney Plus, watch these films. And watch the films with your ears open to the sound design. It really is incredible to re-experience these films that way.
That's, fantastic. Shannon, what about you?
I enjoyed the episode Snowscapes because it was so quiet. It was a very calm, low level but serene atmosphere, just throughout the whole thing. I think that was one of my favorites to work on and just to watch and listen to.
That's awesome. What about you, David?
Well, it's hard to really pick a favorite because it's all about the storytelling. Kindness, I think, was one of my favorites, just because of the feel from it. There's so many specific things, like from Atlantis. I had no idea that sound design was going on under there, and I was just blown away. It's just gorgeous. But I attribute to the artists too. I mean, I got to see, we were looking at very high resolution images that, you start to see the artistry of so much hand drawn, and then, the later technology and the combinations of all that. Just gorgeous stuff, and people putting everything they have into it. So it's that to me was a big takeaway. Just the landscapes and the artistry and the characters is just gorgeous.
Well, if there is a season 3, I would love to see an episode dedicated to eating sounds. Just all the characters eating. Ooh. Just Pumbaa, Winnie the Pooh, all the different characters chewing ASMR eating sounds.
Yeah. Got to be really appropriate for the pandemic, because I think we all had COVID.
we just every moment that a character is eating on screen, I think that could be it'd be more of a gag reel than anything. But anyway, that's my pick.
That's good fun.
Yeah. Well, Amy, David, Shannon, and David, thank you guys so much, not only for your time, but for putting the time into the series. Like I said in the beginning, I couldn't believe it when I watched it the first time. I still can't believe that it's a real thing, because we don't always have the opportunity to just listen to the sound, just experience, the soundscape that all these sound artists have done over the years, even going back to Jimmy Mcdonald. And I just feel like it's such a treat and such a treasure. So yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Michael.
Michael.